John, but the last few weeks especially, we've been going through some of the I am statements that Jesus said of himself. And last week, Luke expounded, shared about, preached on the statement, I am the gate. And it's this shepherd kind of metaphor that as the sheep are enclosed, the shepherd would stand at the doorway of that enclosure and act as the gate to allow the sheep in and to stop the bad, the wolves, the people who wanted to steal. And so Luke shared about the gate. And today we're taking it's the next little bit of John 10, which Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. And so it's another sheep kind of metaphor that we're going to be looking at today. Earlier this year in January, Kirsten and I and the family went to New Zealand, and there we spent a week with our friends on a sheep farm. So our friend Luke is a sheep farmer, and it's beautiful. Green, rolling hills, thousands of sheep. Like he was the farmer of thousands of sheep. We actually got to go with him and did a little bit of farming. And so one day we moved sheep from one field to another field. And so it would be us unlocking the gate and then him whistling and directing his dogs to just bark and push these sheep around the field, get them into a big huddle and then push them through into the next field. And as we're going along, there was one sheep with its head kind of stuck in the fence, and his daughter had to go and take the sheep out, and we're like, how does that happen? And he was saying, oh, well, sheep, they're not so smart. If they get scared, sometimes they'll just freak out and run in a direction. Or if they see grass on the other side that looks better than the green grass on their side, they'll put their head in and they'll get stuck. And 5 minutes later, we're going around, and there's a carcass of a sheep that had died, a month or so before, and we're like, oh, like that one? He's like, yeah, but he wasn't emotionally, there wasn't tears, he wasn't upset. There were thousands of sheep, and so he just accepted that some of them out in the fields would die because of their own foolishness, get stuck or whatever it is. Some would get sick. We saw another one that was sick. He said, oh yeah, I gave him shots, I looked after it, but it looks like it's not going to do well. And again, he didn't feel overly emotionally responsive towards that. There were thousands. There was just one. We went to another place where he bought a couple of hundred sheep from a neighbor. And then we went to one shearing where they were dagging 250 sheep that were going on holidays to the meatworks. And so we kind of got involved in that. This week, as I've been preparing for this message, I've found that everything I learned on a New Zealand sheep farm is the opposite of what Jesus is talking about when he says he is the good shepherd and the context of sheep farmers 2,000 years ago. This week I've been grateful for a book by a guy called Kenneth Bailey, who wrote a book called The Good Shepherd, and it speaks about shepherding throughout the ages of the Old and the New Testament, but especially what it means to be a good shepherd, and he connects it to the context of their day. And that is a big jump that we need to take from the past to today to understand what is it, what was Jesus talking about when he said he was the good shepherd? And we find out so much about the type of shepherding that went on in those days. So if you kind of had what we would call a hobby farm, what they would call life, you might have a couple of sheep and a cow. You might have a couple of animals, like a donkey, and those animals were brought into your dwelling at night. Think Christmas story, manger. The animals would be inside to keep the people warm in the house and also protect the animals from any wild beasts or theft. If you lived in a small village, you'd probably have an enclosure between some of the dwellings, and that enclosure everyone would put their 5-10 sheep into that through the night, and in the morning you'd come along and you'd sing your song, say your thing. Your sheep would come out and they would go out, and you would take them out to a pasture for that day. If you were a shepherd, if that was your profession, then you would either, if you were wealthy, you would own between 30 and 100 sheep. That would be your flock that you would look after. Or you might be a hired hand, someone who would be paid to be a shepherd. And if that was your job, you would take out the sheep from an enclosure, whether it was like Luke showed last week, somewhere out in the wilderness. You would call your sheep, they would follow you. You'd take them to somewhere grassy for that day, and then you'd take them back to the enclosure at night. And whether at that point you left someone, one of the hired hands might be paid to look after the sheep that night and you'd go back home, or you'd all stay together, you'd congregate together, more out in wilderness places. And so this is more of the context of sheep farming. And so you don't have a dog barking, you have a shepherd leading and the sheep following behind. The sheep hear the voice of the shepherd, and they've been hungry, they've been in their pen all night, but they don't come out to anyone else's voice but the shepherd's. They don't get taken to the meatworks in the hundreds. There might be a couple of them that are slaughtered for the family to eat or sold to pay for a debt. So it's much more individualistic. And the farmer would know the sheep individually because there's only 30, 40, 50 sheep to know. And so the farmer wouldn't allow a sheep to get stuck. He'd be keeping his eye generally on the sheep as they went through the day. So it's very different from modern day practices. Jesus in John 10 speaks about himself as the good shepherd, but he does so in the city of Jerusalem. I mean, small by today's standards, but it's still a town where people would have known the context of shepherding. But also, they knew their history. They knew that 1,000 years before, there was a young shepherd boy who loved God and gave his life to serve God. That young shepherd boy who became a king, he wrote a psalm, a song, a poem. His name was David, and the Israelites, the Jewish people, knew him as their greatest king. And David wrote a poem, and you might have heard of it before. It begins like this: "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul." So for the Jewish people who believed in God, who knew King David, they knew this passage. Just as so many of us know this passage today. It's one of the most popular psalms that we have in the Bible. People who don't love Jesus still know this psalm. And this psalm speaks of this amazing relationship between David and God. Actually, between the people of Israel and their God. Their God as their shepherd, who leads them and guides them and takes them through life. Actually, it's this beautiful picture of the ideal of what you would want as someone living and thinking, wow, that's what I want. I desire to be with my God, to be led by God throughout my life. And so they would have clung to this psalm, said this psalm in great hope. Because over the previous 1,000 years from Jesus' day backwards, they went through times where God was still their shepherd, but they were not feeling like they were walking beside quiet waters. And so they would pray this psalm, please God, take us to this time. They would have leaders of their people, which they also saw as their shepherds. And their psalms like Psalm 80 and the prophet Jeremiah and Ezekiel all speak about shepherds and kind of question the leaders of the nation at that time. And this shepherd metaphor grew to be, okay, well, there are good shepherds and there are bad shepherds. And there were so many times throughout Israel's history that they recognized these bad shepherds, these people who were leading them but not taking them down the right path. And so when Jesus comes and he starts to have conflict with the Pharisees, conflict with the leaders of their day, speaking to them about the things they were doing, you started to see what Jesus was saying about the good and the bad shepherds. Take this further and we see just prior to this passage in John 9, but then also leading up to this, you see the kind of people that these Pharisees, these shepherds of the Jewish people, were rejecting. They didn't want the blind people. They were like, oh, you've obviously done something wrong in your life. You've been sinful, so you're not part of our team. We don't need to shepherd you anymore. Those who are lame or who had disease, we don't want to know them. Those who were caught in sinful acts, they're not part of our team. We can boot them out. We don't have to shepherd them anymore. They were selective with the people that they were shepherding. And then you get people from other nations, the Samaritans, who were their neighbors, who they didn't like, or anyone, Gentile, people outside of the Jewish nation. They're like, no, We don't want to know them. We don't want them to be any part of us. We're the shepherds for the good people. And Jesus was highlighting that they actually weren't the good shepherds. That wasn't the kind of shepherding that God was doing for all people. And that brings us, that kind of gives us a little taste of the context to then what Jesus says when he says in John chapter 10, I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and it scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. So out of this, I want to pull out some key things that I think are really helpful and important for us to know the shepherd. Because I really believe the more that we get to know Jesus and understand these different metaphors that he's bringing out about shepherding, about being the gate, about being the door, about all the I am statements, the more we get that, the more rich his relationship with us is. And the more that we go, I want to worship and connect with Jesus, our God and our King. And so to begin with, he says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. There is this connection that you have when you have only a small flock. And I will say that the idea of a shepherd being a leader of a flock is the same as what we would have now. I'm called a pastor because my duties are pastoral. That's an agricultural kind of term, isn't it? So it's a shepherding, a looking after the flock. And so that's up to you to determine whether Luke or Leon or I are good shepherds or bad shepherds. But I hope we're good because you're here. But then that leads to this idea of we could never be anything like what Jesus is in his goodness. And so we know that as we look at this kind of pastoral idea of a shepherd, the shepherd knows his flock. He knows who they are. They listen to his voice. When he calls out, they've been hungry, they've been in their pen all night, the gate's open, he calls out, but only those sheep who know his voice will come out. Everyone else will stay there because they're not sure. They're not sure of what the other shepherd is. They know their shepherd. They're confident with their shepherd. They know he's taken them to grassy fields. They're good with him. There's trust with their shepherd. And it's kind of like I love doing baby dedications, infant dedications. Fantastic. If you've got a kid, let's dedicate them. Let's bring them to the Lord. But when a kid is like 6 to 12 months old, and if you've got a kid at 6 to 12 months old, don't better wait. But they're kind of really clingy to their parents. It's kind of like when they're babies, they don't know, they just hand it around and they're just, okay, they'll just do whatever. But once they hit that 6-month mark, as soon as they're handed to someone that they don't know, they turn to their mum with fear in their eyes. No! What is this person going to do to me? What's the microphone? What? They're asking, why am I standing in front of people? They're scared, they're worried, they're fearful, and they just want to go back to mum, just want to go back to dad. And so it becomes a struggle. They cry, they scream. It can be a really awkward time. It's fun, we get through it. But you know what I mean? Like you can know when babies just have this sense of, I want to go back to security. I know what is good. I know what's right. I know what's my normal fit. I want to go back. In a similar way, we've got this sense that when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, there's a confidence we have when we know Jesus, that we trust Jesus, that we go to Jesus. We want him because we know his character. We know who he is. We know his voice. We start to listen and think, that's what I want to run to, not run away from. So the more we know our good shepherd, the more we'll run to him. And then we get this idea. In Luke 15, there's a parable that Jesus shares about a shepherd with 100 sheep. You might have heard of it, and there's 100 sheep. One of them goes missing, little Sean the sheep. He's missing, the shepherd goes through 99, and then he's like, where's Sean? Anyone see? And the sheep, they're just barring, they can't say anything. And so he's like, okay, you guys stay here. And he leaves them, no doubt, in a safe place. And then he goes off and he looks for the one. In the book with Kenneth Bailey, he was relaying a discussion that happened in the Chinese Communist Party when a missionary went to China and explained and used this parable. And they were shocked. They're like, oh, no, you never leave the 99. The community is all where it's at. If anyone left the community, that's their fault. We reject them. We push them out. That is not, we want to focus on the community. Yet if you're the one, don't you love the idea that your God would go out of his way to find you? Doesn't that give us a kind of security and understanding and hope and this trust that we know that if we're ever apart from the flock, Jesus won't say, well, at least I've still got the flock. He says, well, I'll leave the flock somewhere safe and I'm going to go out of my way to get the one. The ones are important to me because he knows us intimately. He knows our name. He knows everything about us. And so he goes out of his way to find the one. He's a good shepherd. He knows us. And so in response to that being known, we have security and hope and trust in him. The second thing that I think is really great in this, that connects to this, he says, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And so not only will he go out of his way to find the sheep, but he lays down his life. He's willing to give of himself for the sheep. And so that meant in the day when a wolf came along and was trying to attack one of the flock, the shepherd could either choose to say, well, it's only one sheep, let's get out of here. And it goes on to say, a hired hand will run because, I'm not getting paid enough to put my life in danger. That's a big wolf. But the good shepherd will go and attack the wolf. We'll deal with the wolf. We'll get rid of the wolf because the good shepherd loves his sheep. And so this is our understanding of Jesus as our good shepherd who came to earth with the distinct purpose of dying so that we could have life. Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit, God understood that we were separated from him, that we were apart from him because of the things that we've done that have offended him. We've sinned and done things that he's not proud of, that he doesn't want in heaven. We're not pure anymore. And so he had to come to deal with that. And his way of dealing was to go to the cross, to be a sacrifice, to be a punishment for all the things that we have done wrong. And so when he says, I laid down my life, we look through the scriptures and we can see Jesus didn't have to go to the cross, but he willingly went to the cross, knowing that that was the pathway for us to come into right relationship with him. And so when we understand that, when we come back to that, and knowing Easter's 2 weeks away, it's a great time to start processing. What does that mean for us that Jesus sacrificed himself, willingly went that far? What response do we give when we're like, wow, that God would love me so much that he would die for me? How do I respond? What do I do with that? I want to just give worship and thanks. I want to give praise. I want to give myself because of what he's done for me. And it takes us finally back to the very beginning of this where it starts with saying, I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. So much of this world tells us that life is found in controlling life our own way. Life is found in putting me number one. I want what I want. If I want it, I should seek for it and get it. I'm a hunger after those things that I want that will make my life better. And here and throughout the Bible, it keeps speaking of this ideal that life is actually best when we put it into God's hands, when we trust him with our life, not have the focus on what we want and making ourselves feel better in life. And so it's this massive shift that we need to come to say, well, we've actually been designed to live in such a way that God would be central. And as we give our lives over to Him, He makes our lives better, not worse. In our modern day, we kind of think, no, if I give away something, that means I have less control, so it's going to be harder, it's going to be worse. I'm not going to enjoy my life as much as I wanted to enjoy it, and so I'm going to hold on to that life, and I'm going to control my finances how I want to control them. I'm going to control my relational life as I want to control it. I'm going to control my time as I want it. But instead, this says that if we give away our lives, then actually there'll be better. There'll be more. We'll have a more fulfilled life. There's more to be found in our relationship with Jesus that can be lost without Him. That's why I think this psalm still resonates with us today. That's why I think Psalm 23 is still beautiful to us today, because I think it kind of is the water that quenches us when we're thirsty. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing." If the Lord isn't your shepherd, this is the inference of this. If the Lord isn't our shepherd, then we'll lack a lot of things, because we won't have the God of the universe dwelling within us. Our focus won't be on Him, it'll be on us. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. If it was my way, I'd go. But He makes me lie down. He makes me rest in good places. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely Your goodness overflows, and surely Your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What a promise. What a beautiful, incredible promise of a life that's well lived. You go through that passage, and I'd encourage you to go through it, work, verse by verse, unpack it, drink of it. Because as you read through it, you start to see, okay, in good times, God's going to lead me and guide me in good things. In hard times, He's there with me. Even though I'm going through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil because God's with me. You've got the Creator of the world beside you as you're walking through the worst part of your life. Then even though it's going to be tough, it's going to suck, it's going to be horrible, God is with you. He guides us and leads us. He's there with us. He prepares a table for us. It's this beautiful metaphor. It's this picture. In the Middle East, this would be called woman's work, okay? And so to bring this feminine side of God and say, He prepares a table for me. He gets everything ready. He fusses over me. And I come and I sit. Even though there are enemies and there are terrible things around me, I can have peace in the midst of turmoil because my God is leading me through it. And surely for all eternity, I will be in heaven with Him. This is the promise for the end of our lives and for the rest of eternity, that it won't be a life separated from God, but no, it'll be a life with God. Doesn't this give you a little bit of, I want this? Isn't this good? Isn't this good news? This is what God offers for all of us. That if we want relationship with Him, then all we need to know that we're not good enough, that we can't get there by ourselves, that actually we just need Him. We need His forgiveness, His peace, His grace, His hope, His beauty. We need to give up striving for ourselves and say, God, I can't do it anymore. I want You to guide me and lead me. And that might be an entire life thing. That might just be a part of your life that you've been holding on to and saying, no, I just need to give that away because I know, God, You're better in the midst of this. And for those of us who know it, it just gives us hope. It revives us again. It gives us fresh water for our souls. It gives us hope. It turns our hearts to praise. It makes our worries go to worship. It takes us to another plane to know that these things are true and they're promises that God gives us that we can live through and be encouraged by. Our God who loves us so much that he knows us intimately, who knows us so much that he saved us from death, who loves us so much that he wants for us to have fullness in life for eternity and also in this world. And that turns our hearts to praise. Let's pray.